Hi guys, it's Mrs. Thixton again. Here we are talking about our tessellations. So now that we have our grid created, we need to work on creating our tessellation shape that we are going to repeat over and over again to fill up that grid. So I have here in front of me some things that you have at your tables and some things that maybe you don't have at your tables. Everyone is going to be getting has a piece of poster board like this, and it's white on one side, brown on the other. You'll have those at your tables and you're going to follow along with me. I have a sticky note pad here, it's Post-it notes, and I'm going to use these before we get here to our final paper because I want to show you what not to do on these. I have some washi tape here just because I didn't have any masking tape at my house, but you guys are going to have masking tape at school and you're going to have some scissors. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is how we're going to create our tessellations. Now, if you remember from the PowerPoint that you saw earlier, we're going to take a piece off of the top of our, off of the bottom of our tessellations, and we're going to move it to the top. And then we're going to take a piece from the right side and we're going to move it over to the left side. And then those things will fit together. And it might be confusing to you right now. If it's confusing, that's okay. But just know that we're going to be using these, and then we're going to look at that funny shape that we end up with and create a monster out of it. So I don't want you to be worried right now about trying to draw lines that look like noses or mouths or anything like that, because that stuff will come. You can make it into what you want it to be later. But right now, we're worried about creating our shape. So the first thing that I tell kids is to start on the right side of your page. And I want you to create an interesting line that goes from the top of your page to the bottom. So maybe my line will look something like that. Okay? I hope you can see that. Maybe I need to, there we go. I have an interesting line that goes from the top of my page to the bottom. Now, there's something wrong with this line. Not that the line itself is bad, but when I go to cut this out, it's going to be really hard for me to stay on that line without cutting my paper into pieces. Now remember, I told you that we need to have it in one piece because we're going to move it to the other side like this and connect it. Now the way that I cut it, I have pieces and it's going to be really hard for me to line that up. So the way that I could have fixed that is to move it over a little bit. Okay, don't be so close to the edge of your paper because whatever you cut out, you want it to be in one piece. Okay, now that we have that as a do not do, a non-example, let me show you another non-example. So I told you to come in a little ways, so maybe you'll come here and maybe you're saying, okay, an interesting line. All right, perfect. I'm going to do an interesting line that looks something like this. I get kids that do something like this a lot. Now, the problem with this, there's a lot going on this line, but can you see how it mostly just looks straight, right? The difference between the line I just drew here, it was in and out and there was a lot of shape to it, but this, it's mostly just the same all the way down. And that's going to be really hard to cut all of that out, especially out of poster board, which is what you're going to be using. So you don't want to worry about getting it to be too crazy or too like smushed together, too many edges, like, you know, little zigzags in your thing, because that's going to be really hard to cut out. So not too close to the edge, which I did a good job here, but not too crazy of a line either. The last thing I want to tell you is that sometimes when kids do this, they'll start to cut. Let's pretend that this was a good line, but let's say maybe I'll start to cut and I'm getting into it and I realize, oh no, I didn't go in and cut this little section here, so then I'm going to come back and cut that little section out. Well, what happens is then kids lose that piece, and then when they create their tessellation, it's not going to fit together because it's not going to be the same. So if you accidentally mess up when you're cutting, just keep going. Don't go back and fix it. Don't cut little pieces off because then it's not going to line up. Okay? So this is what you're going to do. You're going to create an interesting line on your poster board, just like that. Something like that. It doesn't have to be the same as mine. I don't want it to be the same as mine. This is just an example. Going from the top all the way to the bottom, not too close to the edge and not too crazy where it looks straight and it's going to be hard to cut. Okay, so go ahead and create your line. Once you've created your line, I want you to go ahead and cut it out. Remember, when you're cutting, you don't want to cut any little pieces off. If you mess up with your cutting, that's just your new shape. You're not going back to fix it. See, I messed up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but I didn't go back and cut that off. It's just going to be how it is. Alright, so when you're done, then go ahead and put them on your desk like this. You're going to see that those pieces are going to fit together, right? Right where you cut them. You're going to take your piece that you just cut off, and you're going to make it so it lines up on the other side of your square, just like this. Notice I didn't flip it, I didn't angle it down. I want it to be perfectly lined up at the top and the bottom. Now sometimes our squares aren't perfect the way they get cut on the paper cutter, so try to get it as close to the center as possible, but that's okay. Alright, when you're ready, you may need to pause our video here to get everyone on the same page at the same time, but when we're ready, we're going to use some masking tape. Now I have this fancy washi tape because that's what I had here at home. But you guys are going to take a piece of masking tape and you want it to be just a touch bigger, not a lot, just a little bit bigger than your square. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of eyeball it. And it seems to work the best if you take your masking tape on your piece on the flat side and kind of touch it down like this so it picks up your piece. Okay, then I'm going to turn my piece over and I'm going to, on my brown side, I'm going to kind of line it up here as close as I can. See, this little point comes out here and it lines up over here. So it's lined up perfectly. This little curve would fit this little curve right here. Now, I told you wanted it to be a little bit longer. So this time you're going to fold that tape back just a little bit. There you go. Done. So now you do have a piece that could be a good tessellation piece, but we're going to make this even maybe a little bit crazier or step it up just a little bit more. So now you're going to take your piece, but I want to do one thing. Just because you don't need to do this, I'm just doing this so that you can see this. I'm putting my Sharpie line right on top of the line that I can see, but maybe it's harder for you to see in the camera. I just want you to be able to pay attention to that line where your two pieces are going to meet, because that's going to be important in just a second. Alright, so now we're going to cut a piece just like we did from the side, but we're going to start at the bottom and we're going to draw our line. Remember, not getting too close to the bottom. We're going to come all the way over to the edge here and we're going to draw another funky line that goes from one edge to the other of our page, or of our little square here. Not too close to the edge, not too crazy. And I'm going to cut it out. Again, if you mess up, don't go back and try to cut those little pieces off. It just becomes part of your design then. I'm cutting right across my tape. All right. So now, here's my pieces, how they line up. And now I'm going to lift up my piece and I'm going to put it on the top of my puzzle piece here. And this is where it's important that you pay attention to this line that I drew in darker. Sometimes kids will line it up like this, where it's off a little bit. Make sure that this part of your line, where you tape those two pieces together, you can see that line. Make sure that that line lines up to what's already there, okay? All right, now I'm going to do the same thing. You're going to be using your masking tape. I'm using this fancy washi tape. We're going to pull it out. I'm going to start with the piece I just added. Lay it across. Flip it over. Line it up. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Because if I were to come in here and fold this over, like I did before, I'm not going to be able to see this section of my piece. I'm not going to be able to trace that. And the whole idea of this is we're going to trace this piece to create our monsters. So I need to come in here with my scissors and I need to cut away the areas that are just tape. Get as close to that cardboard or close to that poster board as you can without cutting it to cut apart your piece. And this might take a little bit of cutting, it might take a little bit of patience, but that's okay. Now I also noticed on mine, when I looked at it back here, I could see that I had a little bit of the tape there too. So if it interferes with your design at the top, you need to cut that little section out too. I just had a little tiny bit, but I need to cut that out. Okay. So now my piece is all ready to trace. One more thing that you need to be thinking about though, before we start, is you need to decide two things. Well, not decide two things. You need to add two things to your piece. The first thing you need to do is you need to write your name, because this puzzle piece is going to be very important to you for the next class. And if you lose this puzzle piece, you're going to have to create a new one. Okay, and so we want to make sure that we can get this back to you, so you need to make sure your name is on it. The other thing you need to make sure that you know, that can get confusing when we start tracing our puzzle piece, is you need to know which way is up. Because if I start tracing and then I turn it, then I'm going to get really confused. So what I like to do is I like to draw an arrow, and I know that my arrow always points up. Okay? So draw an arrow on your paper or on your piece and make sure your name is on your piece, because that's going to be really important later on. All right, next time we'll talk about tracing our pieces onto our grids, and then it'll be the exciting part of creating them into monsters. So I'll see you guys soon. Bye.